I'm going to have to undo a button here. For some reason, I think it's so humid in here, and I turn that baptistry on like I always do. You know, I try to turn it on Saturdays, but I noticed that the windows when I came in were already sweating. And so I went ahead and cut it off. It gets that water warm. So now that I've told y'all that, y'all don't be coming over here bathing in that thing through the week, all right? But that's why I think it's so humid in here. As I spoke this morning, this is a publication put out. It's called the Christian Courier, not the Christian Chronicle. The Christian Chronicle is also a publication put out by the Oklahoma Christian University. It's like a newspaper of anybody that calls themselves anything close to Churches of Christ. That's not this. This is called the Christian Courier, and the reason I'm mentioning this, if you would like, I will give you the address, and you can, if you'll send them $1, they will put you on their subscription list. And so every month, you'll get a publication from them, and it's put out by Wayne Jackson and his family. Just an outstanding gospel preacher. If you buy anything that has Wayne Jackson on it, that don't look good when the fire department gets up and leaves. But anything that has his name on it, it would be worth you having. His health's not so good, but he has 2 sons who are going to carry on the work. But a lot of the stuff that they put in here is stuff that he's written. He's a prolific writer, probably has 40, 50 books. But I wanted to share this with you. Well, part of the fire department came back. Is that not a fire department thing? Transfer, okay, good deal. Nobody's on fire then. I wanted to share this with you. It says, and tell me if this headline wouldn't get your attention. How to eliminate 40 to 60% of fatal burns, homicides, fatal car crashes, drownings, rapes, suicides, and fatal falls. How to eliminate 40 to 60% of every one of those categories in the United States of America. You know how you could do that? Well, don't drink. That's the bottom line. According to the National Institutes of Health, alcohol is a significant factor in 60% of fatal burns, drownings, and homicides. About half of all severe trauma injuries and sexual assaults occur with the influence of alcohol. Why don't you ever see that in the news, you know? Why isn't that reported when everybody's talking about rapes and things of that nature? Why is alcohol never put into the picture? 40% of fatal car crashes, suicides, and falls involve the inebriated. Alcohol is the most used mind-altering drug available over the counter. And I know that y'all know how I feel about beverage alcohol. I say it all the time, and I hopefully have convinced just about everybody that will listen, at least of the position I hold and why. In 2017, the U.S. alcohol industry generated revenues of almost $2 billion. And a product that contributed to more than 88,000 deaths in 2017 alone in the United States. It is the 3rd leading cause of preventable death in the United States. Now, you can't smoke a cigarette, but you can drink all you want to, and we'll sell it to you, and we'll tax it. That's amazing, isn't it? And I hope y'all know that I'm not promoting y'all go out and start smoking. I never have done that. I just want to show people how you take something that's not in the realm of full-blown, here's what the Bible says about this sin, and we've gotten so where, you know, that's the worst thing you can do. Well, alcohol's terrible, but the reason I wanted to bring this up is because there's going to be a sidebar to this. Alcohol industry is not stupid. They are very aware of everything that's going on. They pay people to be aware and make sure there's something out there on the market that we need to be a part of. Well, we need to do it. And Brother Jackson here says, like the horse leech from Proverbs 30, verse 15, if you're not familiar with that, says the leech is never satisfied, you know. It'll just sit there and it'll eat and it'll eat and it'll eat until it blows up. But anyway, the purveyors of firewater are never satisfied. Anheuser-Busch has entered into an agreement to develop a marijuana-infused drink with Tilray, a multi-billion-dollar commercial pot-growing company that went public in December 2018. If you're not aware, one of the fastest growing markets and one of the places where people are dumping their money because it looks like the sky's the limit is pot. You know, that thing that we grew up, you know, it wasn't supposed to fool with it, things of that nature, but that's where it's going. It says recreational marijuana is promoted and accepted under the initial guise of an unproven medical treatment. But the actual data of societal damage continues to mount. A growing body of evidence supports the long-term psychotic effects of smoking marijuana. And he quotes a source in there, and it's called Impress. And Impress is a publication put out by a group called the Heritage of Faith Foundation. Have y'all ever heard of them? The Heritage Foundation. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you, some things, I was totally ignorant of this. You know, all I've heard is about how great this oil is, how great pot is, you know. But this fella, he is a graduate of Yale University with degrees in history and economics. He's been a journalist since 1994, worked for the Denver Post, New York Times. He's not somebody who you'd say is one of those crazy conservatives. He's just a journalist. But his wife happens to be Hillsdale. Hillsdale College is the one that puts out this publication. But his wife happens to be a doctor. She is a senior psychiatrist at a place up in New York, right 70 miles outside of New York City. They get most of New York's city's criminally insane folks, called the Mid-Hudson Forensic Psychiatric Institute. And he says, until recently, his wife was a senior psychiatrist there. And he said a couple of years ago, he says, Jackie was telling me about a patient in passing. She said something like, of course, he had been smoking pot his whole life. Of course, I said, yes, they all smoke pot. And so he said, so marijuana causes schizophrenia? He said, I was surprised to say the least. And his wife just kind of looked at him and said, you know, there's a lot of studies out there, big studies, you ought to read them. So this guy went about to do that very thing. He went about to read these studies, and I thought it was pretty interesting because what he says over the last 30 years, psychiatrists and epidemiologists have turned speculation about marijuana's danger into science. You know, it's something we just used to laugh at. But schizophrenia, or being this mental disorder, do you realize as a teenager, if you're supposed to start smoking pot regularly, you're 3 times as likely to develop schizophrenia? And folks who have schizophrenia who are not on their medicine are like 10 times more likely to commit a violent crime, be it rape, be it murder, be it any of these things. These are these little things that are kind of latched on to this pot craze that we all, and let's think about it. Do you remember when you were in high school and your friends would be smoking weed or whatever, you'd be around somebody who's high? What was one of the things you did to kind of get after them? Anybody want to jump out there and say, what would you do? Well, how could you blow somebody's mind who was smoking pot? None of y'all played this game, huh? Just stare at them. Just stare at them. Why? Paranoia. And they'll start thinking, ooh, man, what's going on? I mean, we'd get in cahoots with 4 or 5 people and just stare, and then you could just have somebody trigger, and all of you yell at. Sometimes I've seen dudes run out through the woods, man. I mean, it's just, it's schizophrenia. I mean, they're scared to death, paranoia. But I had no idea. So, brethren, I started reading this because this guy says, I had no idea. He said, I used to be, for the New York Times, I investigated pharmaceutical companies. He says, I was all into that. But he says that the divide between what we're being told and the reality when it comes to marijuana and its effects they're astronomical. They're totally, totally different. We're not being told that. Because right now, politicians, they want to legalize it because it's a source of tax revenue. And, they'll build their coffers. Same things with alcohol. I just read the numbers a while ago. 88,000 Americans last year died as a direct result of alcohol, and yet we're not doing anything besides maybe making the DUIs laws a little more severe to curb that. I mean, these are serious national health issues, and yet we turned a dumb eye or deaf eye to it. This magazine, this article is called Imprimis. Read it for yourself. It really, Imprimis, and it's at the Heritage. If you just type in Imprimis, it'll take you right to it. I was really ignorant about the evidence out there showing that a lot of the folks now, and there was a Swedish study and a Finnish study that really showed this, and America is just now getting into the science of seeing these long-term effects of marijuana smoking and what it's doing. So this guy's article is entitled, What You Need to Tell Your Young People, what you need to tell your children and your young people about smoking marijuana. It's not just, hey, it's nothing. It's a fun. It's nothing. There's no harmful side effects, That was one of the things that kind of amazed me when marijuana started becoming real popular, because as marijuana smoking was becoming popular, cigarette smoking was becoming very evil. It was, oh man, that's the bane of society. Yet, do you know that the carcinogens and things in marijuana are greater than what they are in cigarettes? All the things that are bad for you in cigarettes they're there in the marijuana. Yet we're told that's cool and it's hip. And one of the things this guy does that I appreciated was that he quotes one of the guys who's all into this pharmaceutical marijuana usage. And he'll tell you straight up, he's even admitted it in writing, that basically they want the laws reduced so that it's for the recreational users' benefit. In other words, the dude that wants to go get a dime bag on the weekends, get high and listen to Pink Floyd, this is to help him be able to do that easier by getting all the government to say, okay, marijuana's all right, and legalize it. That's what this is aimed for. It's not about health society and worried about people with glaucoma. And if you ever want a kick, just sometimes watch an episode of Cops when they're pulling people over and guy's got reefer stuck in behind his ear and he says, I got glaucoma. Everybody's got glaucoma. It'd be amazing. Any of us can see anything. But it's that what we were talking about this morning, the idea of toleration. Oh, well, just a little bit of pot here, a little bit there, and next thing you know, it's in the 7-Elevens and so forth. Well, reason we're talking about that, leading into this tonight, is talking about why we suffer. Genesis chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. God created us. He created in His image. He is our creator. He gave us a work ethic, and actions that we do in this physical world, they have consequences, especially since sin came into the picture, and now we can die. Our bodies can be destroyed, and they eventually wear out anyway. We have a responsibility. We have responsibility in our lives. We have to make decisions based on that. And so one of the things we want to talk about is why does bad things happen to people, period? And then we'll talk later on as we talk about good people. But why do bad things happen? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. First of all, sin. Be honest with you, brethren, I don't even want to know. I don't want to hear. I know I will. But I don't really want to hear about that little girl in DeKalb, Alabama. I had fear when I saw her picture and that she'd come up missing. My heart just sank. Because a lot of times people get hurt today because of sin. Denise is looking at me funny. There's a little girl missing from, she, I don't know what happened. Maybe it wasn't anything bad, but, usually when I see something like that, sex trafficking, things of this nature, because people can't control themselves, a lot of bad things happen because of sin. We've just talked about a couple tonight. Alcohol, people murdering people. We have this tendency to think, and that's one of the reasons I'd love for you to read that article, is that we think dope smokers are cool, man, they're laid back, they're nonviolent. Put some tunes and hand me a Twinkie, I'll be good. No. In reality, you're far more likely to become violent. And so when we see elements of the population that we know smoke a lot of weed, it's not too hard to understand why there's as much violence. It changes the way you think about things. And, bad things happen because of sin. Ripley's, believe it or not, called this the Great Bible Discrepancy, that bad things happen. Well, what they didn't realize is by saying that something's bad, you're instigating that there's something good, and so you have to make up what is your standard. Because unless there's a God in heaven, unless there's a standard, then why is this necessarily bad? Why is this necessarily good? It's an age-old argument that we've made. Galatians chapter 6 at verse 2 says that we are to bear one another's burdens. And so in any way that we can, it's a good idea to try to help each other as we go through these difficult things in our life. But verse 5 says there's some burdens you're going to have to bear on your own. I can't go through surgery for you. You can't have an x-ray for me. As we get older, our bodies start to deteriorate. You don't even have to get older sometimes to have bad things happen. There's some burdens that we must bear. There's some things that I can't do for you, you can't do for me. Cannot take the pain for someone else. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you take the pain from your child so they wouldn't have to go through that? But, you know, we'd be doing them a disservice and a lot of times in the fact that you learn from pain. You know, I can think of so many things that I've done over my life. Like, well, how come you use a knife where you cut away from yourself? Well, I've got a few places I can show you where that's a real good idea. Never cut towards yourself. Well, how did I learn that? Well, you lay yourself open a few times, and guess what? That's a memory. That is a life lesson, I like to call those. You suffer for other people's failures, though. We all do that, but we also benefit from other people's labors. What do I mean from that? Some guy climbs into his automobile because he's not able to control himself when it comes to beverage alcohol, and he pulls out into your lane of traffic, and you hit him head on, and you're killed. You suffered because he's failed at maintaining discipline. He couldn't control himself. But we also benefit from other people's labors. Think about medicine. You think about the things that go on today and how we're all blessed with the things that we have access to now. Somebody spent a lot of time doing that. Some people even sacrifice their lives sometimes in trials and things with medications and so forth. Sometimes there are things that we have to go through because of bad decisions. You ever done that? You ever made a bad decision? And, you know, you had to deal with those consequences. You ever thought you had enough time to pull out in front of that car and come to find out that car was going a little faster than you thought it was, and boom, there you are, spinning around and around thinking, you know what, that probably wasn't the best idea. I probably could have waited, and that would have been better. So all of us know what we're talking about there. Proverbs 13 at verse 15 says, good understanding giveth favor, but the way of transgressors is hard. You live that kind of life where you make decisions I've watched that in my family over and over and over. My family, I wasn't raised going to church. Most of my family would, I guess you would say, are non-religious. Of course, at a funeral or something, you know, God would come up, things of that nature. But as far as life, they did what they wanted to. And I have watched as family member after family member has died of different diseases that we help along. Got a cousin right now who is going through colon cancer, and, you know, he smokes a lot. And, you know, those carcinogens, a lot of people think, well, it's just lung cancer. No, that gets in your body, and your bloodstream goes to all kinds of different places. And it is if you smoke, your chances of colon cancer go way up. And then if you don't have a colonoscopy from time to time and you get colon cancer, guess where the first place it goes? Over to your liver. And then from there, it just takes off throughout your lymphatic system, and it can be very deadly. The ways of transgressors hard. I've been with people who hurt themselves, harmed themselves under the influence of alcohol. You know, if you're going to live that lifestyle, you're going to have to pay the price. We understand that, Galatians 6, 7, 8, and 9. Be not deceived. In other words, don't fool yourself. God isn't mocked. He put these physical laws in motion. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. We understand that in the plant world. But this is also talking about life. You know, if you live that hard life, you're going to get that. You're going to have those results. You know, I've been listening to a band that one of the. Well, I'm sure y'all have ever heard of Queen before, right? Freddie Mercury, the lead singer, very talented individual. Man, he could hit notes but he was a practicing homosexual, and he caught it long before the drugs were as good as they are now, and so he died very early into it. Bad decision. He reaped what he sowed. God has said, you know, that you're not supposed to do that, and there's this disease, of course, is part of that. It says, he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And so, you know, we're going to reap in due season if we faint not. Isaiah 57, 20 and 21, the wicked are like a troubled sea when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There's no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. You know, it's always going to be something. Sin has consequences, and it may affect other people, your sins. You're not an island. Things that we do, they have consequences. They have consequences. It's a part of life. When we go against the will of God, there's a price to be paid. It always has been, always will be. And you may somehow get through this life and not pay that price. You may seem to come out on top all the time. But even if that is the case and you die, there'll be a price to be paid at that point. One of the things, I go to the hospital a lot. It's like I'm going to have to go a lot this week too. But one of the things when I leave there, I'm so thankful, for my health and things of that nature. But I'm not naive, brethren. I don't think any of us are. We realize that we're just a phone call away from an ambulance ride and being in one of those beds and folks coming to see us and praying for us. And, it happens to all of us. We just don't want to help it along by doing things that are against the will of God, because he's told us, these things will have consequences. Do drugs pay? Well, the answer, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? But try to convince your average teenager. Does drinking pay? Well, yeah, it pays. It has dividends. It will pay. But you mistreat your body, and what's going to happen, And I know folks told me for years about smoking, things of that nature. But when you're young, you're going to live forever. Those things seem to kind of go in one ear and out the other ear. But I'm at the age now where I realize that, things happen. And, a lot of times things happen as a result of things we did a long time ago. Do you realize that before you're 18, you pretty much set the course of action for skin cancer? Do you know that, Walker? I didn't realize that. The sun, if you get a lot of sun, you get a lot of sunburns prior to your 18th birthday, you'll be far more likely to deal with skin cancer when you get older. Had no idea of that. But especially, fair-skinned people in particular. Now, that's not saying that's always the case, but the probabilities go way up. Forgiveness of sins is one thing. We can be forgiven of sins, no doubt about it. But, you're going to have to pay for those sins, either through the court system, if it's criminal, or through, like we've been talking about, our bodies. The results or consequences of sin are another. Well, you think of Moses striking the rock. That didn't seem to be that big a deal. Remember, God had told him to speak to the rock, and he went out there, and he was really ticked off. And, boy, if you put it all together, you can see why he was mad. This is the second group. Their parents have all died. He's dealing with the group that's supposed to go in and take over the land, and what are they doing? They're griping about not having water. And I know it's got to be like a never-ending broken record for him. But instead of listening to what God says and speaking to the rock, he says, "You rebels, must we fetch water out of this rock?" And, of course, he strikes the rock, and notice what God said as a result of that. The Lord spake unto Moses in verse 12, says, "Because you believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you should not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them." And where I'm at in my daily Bible reading right now, he's in a series of sermons in the book of Deuteronomy. 3 sermons in the book of Deuteronomy, 2 kind of short, 1 very long, where he's just telling them about what's happened to them. Deuteros being duo, twice, the second, and nomos, the law. It's sometimes referred to as the second law or the second giving of the law. But he's talking about, and this is why he's having to do it. They're fixing to go over into the promised land. He can't go. So he's having this one last gospel meeting, I guess you could say, or at least tent revival before he goes. People sometimes do not get the punishment they deserve in this life. We see that. The psalmist saw that. Remember when he would talk about, I see wicked people prosper. We even sing a song, why do others prosper, living so wickedly year after year? Well, sometimes that's the case, but they will get one day the reward they deserve on the other side for sure. When we realize that heaven is reward, it helps keep things in perspective. When you go to see somebody like Bob Spurling, he was a gospel preacher, wrote a couple of books when he could still use 2 fingers and his thumb. He got a disease that attacked his body, and so he couldn't do anything anymore, couldn't get out of bed, He had one of them little jazzy chairs for a while, but then he got to a point where he couldn't get in and out of the bed, and so he just got to where he could just, use his computer, talk to it, and then, of course, he had 2 fingers and a thumb he could use, and then he eventually passed on. It says when we realize that heaven is reward, that helps us put all this in perspective. I think of that kind of situation, and I wonder how I would handle that situation. He handled it, as a matter of fact, a blessing for a whole lot of folks. He's got a book. I love the cover of it because it's got a frog going down like a crane's gullet. The crane has the frog in his mouth, but his legs are sticking out, and the frog has his arms wrapped around the crane's throat. He's not letting him swallow him, you know. And the title of the book is Don't Ever Give Up. Don't ever, ever give up. And that's what his sermon was, you know, is well, no matter what life hands you. It says, much unhappiness today. Many young people seem sad, seem angry. You know, it's frustrating when you look at the news today, and that's one of the reasons I try to shine, especially the evening news, the national news, because everybody's ticked off about something. Everybody's upset, and I'm just thinking, man, we have so much. You know, when's the last time you heard of somebody actually starving to death? Finding people, you know, nothing to eat, you know, out, no place to, it's just, we're so blessed, and it seems like so many people today are upset with that. Well, why do bad things happen? Could it be that many have turned from God? You know, they did a homeless study here in Chattanooga, and I thought it was pretty interesting because we do have a big population of homeless folks in the Chattanooga area, not as big as some of the warmer climates. California, absolutely inundated, overran with homeless due to the weather. San Diego, Mediterranean climate. You've got L.A. that's pretty warm most of the time. But, you know, in the study they did in Chattanooga, they found that if these folks could be given a house, a lot of them didn't want it. They wanted the lifestyle that they had, which was, you know, living hand to mouth and having a little stuff to get high from time to time and drink, and that was the lifestyle that they had chosen. And I remember we used to have back when I was growing up, we called them bums. I know that's probably not the politically correct thing to say now, but he was just an old man. He loved his beer. He'd come in, somebody give him $1 or $2, and he'd get him a couple of tall Wiedemann's, you know, and a plug of that tobacco. And from time to time, I'd notice he'd come in and he'd be missing a finger or something. He had gotten frostbite, you know, lost part of his foot. And it just got worse and worse, and, you know, we all expected it. And one day, sure enough, they found him dead out behind the store there in some boxes. He'd just, you know, gotten drunk, and I guess hadn't got into a place where he could warm himself up, you know what I'm saying, wrap up like he normally did, and he died of exposure. You know, he had a problem. He had a problem. He had turned away. Obviously, he didn't think of God. The only real peace and happiness is serving God. That is the catalyst. That's the only, in this life, brethren, we're never going to be happy. We're never going to be satisfied. It's in us to want to strive to do better, to have more, to do more things. And when we can funnel that and realize that my life here is to fear God and keep His commandments, to do what He would have me to do. It gives me a purpose. It's something to strive for. That really is the only way to have that peace and real happiness that Jesus would talk about, the joy, great joy that we would have. David's another example of sin getting us into trouble now. You know, sin got David into a lot of trouble. It cursed his family. You know, we talked a little bit about Ammon and Tamar this morning, how he raped his half-sister, and the sword never left David's house as a result of his adulterous relationship with Bathsheba. But we can look at Hebrews chapter 11, and we know that David has his reward now. He was able to come through that. And all the grief that came with that, and all the times that he could have thought back over and said, man, I wished I had done that different. We realize that David is in heaven. Our reward is not here. We're not promised. You know, that's one of the things, brother. Sometimes I feel so guilty, you know, in a way that I shouldn't. But we have so much. We have so much to be thankful for. We have our health. You know, we're here tonight. What a blessing that is. The clothes that we have, the food that we eat, the water that we're not in real need of any material type things. And we think about how much we have here and so forth, and that, you know, and didn't realize our reward is not here. This is not what it's not all about. Sometimes we see sin punished in this life. You see the alcoholic. You know, brethren, I've told you, and I'll continue to tell you, it's something I want people to understand. My grandfather, he died a drunkard. My daddy drank until his body would no longer allow him to drink. And then, you know, he liked to tell people in my family that he hadn't quit drinking, that drinking had quit him. But those long-term effects, he had lost his leg, diabetes was bad. You know, I don't think people realize how much sugar is in alcohol. A murderer. Sometimes, we see folks executed. They had to pay for those sins. Sodom and Gomorrah, punished in this life. Those cities were destroyed. And then we've seen the epidemic of AIDS and things of that nature, and realize that sometimes in this life, sin is punished. We look at Israel. They were removed as a kingdom. The northern kingdom taken away forever. The southern kingdom removed for 70 years and restored, and then ultimately destroyed. It says in Psalms 9 at verse 17, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. That's a powerful indication. Now, we're going to go into more of this in the next few weeks. We're going to talk about particular instances, poor judgments, accidents, and ignorance. And then we're not going to leave off one of the greatest culprits of suffering, and that is the one who likes to bring suffering on us all, and that is Satan. Satan's behind some of it. Just have to read the book of Job and realize that. So why do we suffer? Well, some of the reasons we've looked at is just because there's sin in the world. Sometimes bad judgments of ourselves, sometimes bad judgments of other people. And then sometimes because we live in a physical world where things don't go like they're supposed to. Jerry Lewis. I remember when I was a kid, one of the big things every year was the Jerry Lewis telethon. You remember that? The March of Dimes. We'd go down there sometimes, Memorial Auditorium. They'd have shows, and stuff. And back when my grandmother and stuff was alive, that was a big deal. And you know what that's all about? That's about a genetic defect. That's about something somewhere in the process of us being born. Some chromosome didn't do everything it was supposed to. Some in the DNA didn't stay on the right line, and something happened, and some little child was born without the ability to walk, or the other things that go along with that. That's the world that we live in. We just saw, people. I just could not believe the flooding out in Savannah, Tennessee. Didn't y'all see pictures of that? Out in Savannah. I didn't realize how close that was to Henderson, but places that hadn't been underwater in years. It was just, they're going through that. Why? Well, we live in a world where storms happen. From what I imagine Corey could tell us more about this, but from what I understand, it was not the wettest month in Chattanooga, but it was the wettest month in our area, the whole Tennessee Valley watershed, or whatever they call that. This is the most water we've ever had. We live in a world where sometimes it rains a lot. Sometimes a hurricane blows up the coast and causes great havoc. That's just the nature of it. So that's some of the reasons we suffer. We'll try to get a little bit more specific in the weeks that follow. If you're here tonight, you're not a New Testament Christian, rest assured that if you die in that condition, the Lord tells you, you will suffer. None of us want to suffer. That's what we spend most of our time being so safe, have alarm systems and smoke alarms and airbags, and all those things are to help us when we're going through life to try to keep us safe. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to be in pain. But that's what heaven and hell is all about. Heaven, the great reward; hell, the great curse. The suffering, and listen how it's described by Jesus, the Savior, the loving Savior. A bottomless pit where the worm dieth not, and the teeth are gnashing, and there's a flame. Those are all things that equate with great pain. You don't want to do that. You certainly don't want to do that for eternity. So why not do what you need to do to be right with God, be it obey the gospel or confession of sin?